Wonderful. Welcome to our CADE, Commission on Access, Diversity, and Excellence member spotlight. And I'm here today with Georgianna. Georgianna, want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your institution and title?
Sure. I am Georgianna Meléndez. Pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Assistant Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at UMass Boston. And I have been in this role since 2013. UMass Boston is a campus that has about 17,000 students and about 3,000 employees.
Great. So I know you have been on the commission for some time. How did you hear about CADE and what made you decide to join?
Well, at the time that I took on this role as an interim chief diversity officer, that was my first step into the space. My chancellor, who was Dr. Keith Motley, was the president of the CADE, and so pulled me into initially just getting involved, attending the conference, talking to people, and then hosting one of the conferences on our campus. So that's how I started to get to know CADE.
Fantastic. So CADE is dedicated to working on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging that impact APLU member institutions. How does this align with the work that you're doing on your campus?
I mean, it is the work that we're doing on our campus. And I think it was a wonderful way, especially for me at the time. While I wasn't new to diversity work, I was new to higher ed diversity work and how it flowed through some of the politics around it, learning different ways to approach it, understanding that every organization had a unique structure, which was odd because student affairs has a particular structure, or you could pick an office and there's some clarity about how you might approach it. And I think at the time we're moving in the direction where there's more clarity, but it was really a model that each campus was devising on their own. And so being able to talk to other people about how they approach their work. Some people have been in their roles for more than 20 years, which was surprising. And a good chunk of us have been in it less than 3. And so it was interesting and a great way to learn about the work that we're doing on our campus. It also informed the work on our campus and it gave us access to tools that we didn't necessarily know about, because you don't know what you don't know until you start talking to other people who are also doing the work.
Awesome. And that aligns nicely with our next question, which is about what you're doing right now. So what challenges are you facing on your campus this year? I know we're in a time of continued pandemic. I mean, we keep talking about being in the pandemic and in the new now and what comes next. But those of us who are doing this work are situated so closely in the right now. So what are you facing? And can you share how you're making progress or accomplishment that has made you feel good in this time of uncertainty?
Sure. I mean, we are in a space that's a little bit different in that we have to deal with both the challenge of engagement overall, how to get anyone engaged in anything, right? But particularly when you have a heightened awareness around racial justice issues in our community and restorative justice issues in our community. You have activism still happening, even though we were quarantined for a period of time. And yet acts of hate and oppression continue to happen, even in a virtual world. And so we as a campus are not unique in dealing with that. We have those issues, and we have been fortunate enough to have each other in CADE, and also because we talk to each other across our campuses, but also there is a shared commitment on our campus to want to make sure that our campus is a welcoming place. Now, the challenge around that and the work that we have to do is that while we might have the same goals, we don't all have the same approach or don't think that the pathway is exactly the same. And some of us, including myself, we're all committed to our way of doing things, and we're trying to open up ourselves to be more flexible. And so I'm excited that in this past year, we, through our chancellor and our provost's office, have established a restorative justice commission and have brought together 20 individuals from across the campus, students, staff, faculty from different disciplines, some people who have been immersed in this work for a long time and some who are new to it, but are all committed to restorative justice, so racial and social justice issues. And we've been meeting routinely and regularly, pushing through recommendations for how different divisions should approach this work. And we've had to work out some of our own sort of how we approach it, our power, our connections to power and positionality in the organization. And it's a work in progress. We haven't figured it out, but we're having the conversation. So I feel pretty good that we can have the conversation, but also it's not just within the commission, so we have divisions who are now looking at this in a way that I haven't seen us do in the past, right? So I've been in this role since 2013, but on campus since 2009, and I've seen some shifts, right? Some waves of how we approach this work. And I see division just creating their own approach to how their department or their division is going to think about racial and restorative and social justice issues. And that's awesome, right? Coordinating it is a little bit of a challenge, and figuring out how we make sure everyone knows what everyone is doing is part of the work. But it is the remote status, we're actually back on campus, right? But we were remote for a while, has broken some of the ongoing connections that we've had. And it's a lot of work to figure out how you bring those back together. And so, but we're doing it, and that's exciting. And we are committed to to having conversations with each other and trying to make sure that everyone knows what each other is doing.
Can I ask a question about that? So you've talked about that the work that you're doing, first of all, is fantastic. And I want to know a little bit more. And if you can share, what are some of the things that the different areas have uncovered that they want to focus on? So that's one question. Another question is, what are some of the strategies you're using to sort of repair and reconstruct those communication pathways?
I think that list could be long, right? So, but I'll start with that we as a campus aren't always aware of what each other is doing. And so there are times where you might hear some unrest by students or staff or faculty because they believe that no one is doing, and fill in the blank, around a particular issue. And then it might escalate or get to a place where there's unrest is a strong word, but where they might write up a letter or a demand or sort of want to meet or want to sort of push something. And not always, but often when you sit down, you realize actually someone is doing that and someone has done that. And we may have sent out a communication campus-wide that may have gotten lost, or there's no sort of magic wand that we have found that sort of says, this is the way that everyone will hear it, right? Mm-hmm. And so where we're not on campus, and even if we did like a marketing campaign where we put up posters to say something, some people are on campus and some are not. Or they might only go to one building and not the other. And so we are trying to navigate what that new way of communicating what we do looks like. And so not knowing what each other is doing is a challenge. And it's actually something our RJC, the Restorative Justice Commission, is looking at. And while we're, as an organization, we're right about to launch a new branding. And so that means that we're thinking about, well, what does that mean for how, when someone on campus sees something that either is coming down the pike and they know that it's going to have a disparate impact on a population, or they can already see, last time we did this, these things were probably, I want to remind whoever's in charge that these things need to be paid attention to, have a place and know who to go, even if you don't know who everyone is. And on a campus as big as ours, that is a challenge, right? So we have, through our restorative justice, we've created an email, we've created a student diversity council that is not a club, but its function is to really engage with students regularly so that the students themselves are part of the solution. So instead of just having a student say, I'm unhappy with this thing that happened in this department and report it, we're saying, okay, so what solutions do you have? What would have made this easier? What opportunities did you see in this? And have the student themselves engage with that department, but we would facilitate an introduction directly to the correct person. So it's not just kind of waiting till somebody vaguely from that department gets back to them. And then the coordinator from our office from the Diversity Council would then make sure that there is follow-up and engagement between the student and the department. Sometimes, as we know, a student may have an issue with something and the answer might be no. So here's an example of a no, and I'll give you an example of a yes. An example of a no is that we had pavers on our plaza that were topsy-turvy and were creating access issues. So someone who had mobility issues moving across them could get hurt. And so the request was that we fix them. And at the time, we had to do an assessment because, of course, you want to make access available to everyone. But we did have an alternative catwalk temporarily, and we knew that we were ripping down the plaza within like a year in the next 18 months. And so the cost of repair weighed against, the temporary access that it would provide. The answer was no, but here is our alternative safe and accessible way to get across campus. And so, but there was an explanation and an analysis that was done to look at the why. And a yes was, we had a student who was undocumented say having trouble figuring out why none of the scholarships are available to me. And I can't, I have trouble believing that they're all federally funded. And so a quick look at how these were set up is truly not, they weren't all federally funded. And sometimes when we are in process of creating a new form, so we take an old form and we use it as our template to use as an application. What happened was one that had required citizenship was used as a template. And it wasn't an intentional exclusion of students who are undocumented, but a student alerted us to the fact that that was the case, and a full review of all applications was done. The student helped with that. We paid the student to help us with that. And it opened access pathways for undocumented students. And so there are things that are structural, that are oppressive, that are not intended, that we're trying to identify, and we're trying to not make it be the person who experiences it, who identifies it, but sometimes they are. So also teaching activism to the students in terms of be part of the solution, and we'll support you in that.
That's fantastic. Thank you for giving both of those examples, both how you would have to say no and then also what a yes would look like. I think those are great opportunities for folks to be able to learn from. So thinking about what you're doing on your campus, and it's January 2022, and we're really kind of launching into this next year, what's one big idea that you think CADE could work on in this next year that would help you in your work?
Well, I think the having a regular way for us to communicate with each other so that we can continue to build this remote community. I think when we have the conferences, there's always special bonding that happens. First year you might go and feel like I don't know anyone and everyone seems to be friends, and to eventually just be part of that group, and which can be done, I think, in a remote way. The community for me that would help me is that we seem to be in a similar trajectory. Like the types of issues that each campus deals with changes, but seems to change together. Like when we were dealing with the murder of George Floyd, everyone was dealing with that same issue. When students were protesting around those things, around Asian hate, acts of Asian hate during the pandemic that are still ongoing. We're not the only ones dealing with that. And so trying to think through strategies for supporting the community, for prevention when possible. And also, sometimes there's sort of a forensic look at technology to see, the origin of acts of hate. And someone has used a firm that was useful and helpful that we didn't know about. So being able to share those resources. So that virtual community, building that, I think would be great, a great next step for CADE.
Great, good things to work on. I'm jotting down notes for that, absolutely. So our last question that I kind of want to end with today is, we know that working to support diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging on a campus within our communities and within the world is incredibly hard. Do you have a piece of advice or wisdom that you use to ground yourself that you'd like to share with others?
You're not alone. And this is a job. I mean, it is a passion. And we're very committed to it, which makes it personal, which increases our stress levels, wanting to fix everything. But if we remember that we're not alone, and that we have to take care of ourselves, that we can't separate our identities from the work, which also increases stress. The self-care becomes more important. So even if you are N of one on your campus whose title is connected to diversity, equity, and inclusion, you are not N of one on your campus who cares. And also, you know, that's another reason to lean on folks in the CADE community. There are times you need to vent, and it's not safe to do so on your campus. Even with people you feel you trust, you can vent to other people who are in it with you, even if they're not in the same space with you. So self-care is, I think, my strongest recommendation for folks.
That's great advice. So coming up in our last little bit of time, is there anything else that you would like to share about your experience with CADE or the work that you do at your institution to our members before our next time?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things I have appreciated about CADE as a space is that we, especially when we do conferences or talks, that we're always willing to look at this through an intersectional lens, and that we recognize that, you know, while racial identity has been at the top of many of the conversations, we can't separate that out from the other parts of ourselves, our, you know, our gender identity and expression. You know, thinking about our nationality, thinking about all the parts of us that we bring, and being able to think about mental health in our workshops. Those things have helped us think about the work on our campuses, because you're not just a BIPOC student, right? That's not the only part of you that you bring to campus. And so it has been nice to explore that and to figure out how you include that in your strategic planning and in your conversations. When you're thinking about disabilities, there's not a lot of spaces where you bring that into conversation, and CADE does that. So I have appreciated that about being part of this group.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much for spending the time today to be our first spotlight of our CADE Spotlight series. And I look forward to engaging with you in our next CADE meeting, and hopefully in person maybe this year for summer meeting in our APLU annual meeting. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you.